All right, we got people coming in. How's it going, everybody? We are going to be starting here in a little bit. Let me share my screen. How's everybody doing today?
Good.
Good to see you, Ron. Good to see you, Chris.
Hey.
You too, guys. Good topic today.
Very timely. Looks like we got about 20 people in. I'm going to put up a slide to show we're going to start at 11:05. So we'll start in 3 minutes here. All right, you guys see my screen okay?
Yes.
Great. So everybody's joining. How you guys been? Hey, Ben, Ron. How you been, Chris?
Good.
Very good. Very good. Yeah.
I've had a couple days of travel the last couple weeks, so getting back into in-person meetings. I'll tell you, the airports are busy. That's for sure.
Yeah. And the deals on flights are all gone.
Yeah, President Gasoline may be contributing to that. I don't know. But yeah, are you guys going to do the going to be taking part in the Disrupt conferences coming up?
I would assume so.
Yeah.
So I think not every single one, but don't really have the. I know there's one, the first one in Boston. I won't be able to make that one, but a few others I will be able to. So
very cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to them. And for everybody, joining us, we have 28 in the chat. 29 now. Welcome everybody. We're going to kick it off in a few minutes. We're just going to give everybody to the 5 after to get in. Then we'll kind of kick off the presentation and get into the deep dive here around security. So I don't know about you guys. Chris, I know you're on the East Coast. And Ron, you're in Austin, right?
I'm Austin based, but I'm in New Mexico, in Corrales, New Mexico. And the picture behind me is Telluride up north from here.
Nice.
Colorado. Yeah.
How's the weather there?
It's good. It's like 43 degrees right now in Corrales.
Really?
It's going to get up into the 60s, I think. Yeah.
Wow, man. Okay. I was just going to complain about cold weather, but I guess I won't do that to you now.
Yeah.
But
it's dry. It's dry out here, so it's not too bad. Unlike Austin, when it's cold, you feel it to the bones. You know?
Yep. I know a little bit about that in the Northeast here. Yeah, it's been nice here. Actually, I think it's going to hit 80 degrees today here in the Philly area. So definitely happy about that. All right. So what do we got? All right, 1 minute, guys. Again, everybody who's joining, welcome. All right, it's actually 11:05 now. So let's go ahead and kick it off. Thank you, everybody, for joining. This is our second official Zentegra IGEL workshop. And just to give you guys a quick idea of what we're doing here and what the goals are for these workshops. It's Zentegra, and we'll be introducing the company Zentegra in a minute, who we are. We have 3 different things that we provide, workshops, webinars, and boot camps, and basically the difference between them is the webinar is a little more marketing. The workshop that we're doing today is we go more technical. We're going to get into the weeds a little bit. You're going to see us, go into settings and make changes live and do things. So it's a great time to, kind of get sharpened on the technical skills around IGEL and IGEL partners. So the plan is we're going to do these monthly, and every other month we would like to bring in an IGEL ready partner. So we did Liquidware last month. Next month it'll be Logon VSI, and then the off months we'll just do different IGEL topics. Today being securing your OS with IGEL. So we're going to get into endpoint security and why you should consider IGEL, and and use it as part of your strategy for securing your endpoint. But we'll do some introductions here. It's Chris, Ron, and myself here. Let me first talk about the partnership between Zentegra and IGEL. Zentegra is, we're known as an elite partner with IGEL, and we have a services specialization. So that means we have the highest partner level with IGEL. And we also can provide services if you have issues, or maybe you just need a health check, or you need help upgrading your environment or migrating it or setting it up. We can do all of those things for you. We've won IGEL Partner of the Year in the past. We actually this year won IGEL Growth Partner of the Year in 2022. And IGEL is a huge part of our business and a huge part of our growth as a company. It's one of our core technologies that I'll kind of highlight here in a minute. But just quick intros. Myself, my name is Patrick Toner. I live in the Philly area currently. I'll be moving to Jacksonville hopefully in the next 2 months here, as my family and I relocate down to Florida. 12 plus years in the industry. I was actually at IGEL with my former colleagues here, Ron and Chris, and I spent about 4 years at IGEL. Before that, I was working, different roles in end user compute. Most recent before IGEL was healthcare, where I was an IGEL customer. And I'm a husband of my beautiful wife, father of 4 children. We actually just had our 4th a month ago. She just turned 1 month old, Brielle. And when I'm not working, I like to serve my local church. I help with the local addictions ministry. And it's just really fulfilling. So if you guys ever want to reach out, I'm on LinkedIn. Hoping to make some connections here with you guys. And but I'll go ahead and kick this off with who is Zentegra. Because maybe you're joining this. I'm assuming you do know who Zentegra is, but in case you don't, I just want to walk through, who we are and what we do. You may know us in one area and not know that we do, a bunch of other things that can bring you a lot of value. But who are we? So here's a quote from our founder, Andy Whiteside. He says, Zentegra was born out of a need for customer enablement and true partnerships. And Andy Whiteside, who's our founder and CEO, he was a Citrix sales engineer. He won Citrix Sales Engineer of the Year. So he's, had a really great career at Citrix, but he saw what was going on in the partner community and saw that partners just were not actually bringing value or partnering with the customers. It was more transactional. Citrix would engage with customers, and then a partner would come in and do the transaction. So Zentegra was founded out of this idea that, a value-added reseller should actually bring value. And there's many ways that we do that. So one of the things that we do is we focus heavily on our core technologies. Here's a list of some of our core technologies. These are the technologies we're living and breathing every day. We have a whole bench of engineers on both our consulting and services division, as well as our pre-sales division, where I reside in the sales organization. And this is all we do all day, every day. We use this technology in our own environment, and these are the things that we focus on. And we can service you with those technologies in a couple different ways. We can resell. So obviously we're a VAR. We can we can sell you the software if you want to use this as your reseller. We also provide services, consulting. We have an entire managed services division. We can do actually to the point of we can host your entire Citrix environment or anything in your environment. We have data centers on East Coast, West Coast. But ultimately, we're here to bring you solutions. We're here to, not just to sell you things, but to actually give you a solution. Talk about how other customers, how other people in the industry are using these technologies, using these tools, and helping you to achieve your goals. And then on top of that, we do a lot of enablement. So you can find out, we're always doing events. When I was at IGEL, I always loved working with Zentegra. We always did a lot of events together. And I always appreciated just how they were had a huge emphasis on engaging with people and getting out in the field and doing things. We're hoping to do more of these in person as we're getting more back to normal here. But for now, we do them both. We do them in person. We're doing a lot of, we just did a whole stadium series of different baseball, hockey, basketball games. Those baseball games are ongoing now. And, so keep an eye out for events.zentegra.com. Look for local events in your area. You can find out about the different workshops, webinars, things like that. So obviously we talked about webinars as, more of a marketing type thing where you'll hear from the different technologies, companies like IGEL, Citrix, and you'll hear directly from them what they're doing, where their direction is. So we'll have those. We also have podcasts. So Chris Feeney, who's on the call, he does a weekly podcast with Andy Whiteside, our founder. I just started to join those. They're a lot of fun. And you can subscribe to them with any of the popular podcast apps. So highly recommend you check that out. We do also, a lot of people don't realize this, we have an entire staffing division. So if you're looking you need help, and especially in end user compute and digital workspaces, if you need help in that area, you're looking for a good candidate, we can help you there. And alternatively, if you're looking for a job and you're, in this space, end user compute, digital workspaces, reach out, we can get you placed somewhere. You can find out more at jobs.zentegra.com for that. A couple other things. We offer free micro assessments. That's actually free. It's no catch. We do that for, traditionally we've done it for Citrix and VMware, but we actually just started to do an IGEL micro assessment. So it's about a 2-hour engagement, and then we give you a SWOT analysis of your environment. So if you're looking for something like, hey, I don't know, there's something off in my environment, bring us in, reach out. We'd be glad to schedule a call with you and go through your entire environment, take a look at it holistically, and give you a SWOT analysis. And one of the last things I'll mention here, this is Andy's, it's a partner company of Zentegra called Computers for Community, founded by Andy. And the idea here is to really give back. So one of the cool things, if you're on the call now and you guys are looking to get rid of equipment, get rid of devices, you can donate that type of stuff to Computers for Community. They'll give you a certificate of, they'll wipe everything clean and give you that certificate to make sure everything's good. And then alternatively, they will also, if there's a charity that you like to give to, let us know. And, Computers for Community will donate devices or equipment or whatever they need to that organization. So a really good cause, check that out. And a great way to kind of limit e-waste as well, just repurposing devices. And I'll mention this, even though it's a little sad, this window, the first window has closed, but we are giving away a Bronco in a few weeks. The registration for this is closed. However, I have received word from our marketing team that we will be doing it again next year. So stay tuned for that, where you can register to win a brand new Bronco. And you're looking at the color of the one this year. I don't know what it will be next year, but we'll stay tuned for that. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of who we are as Zentegra, but let's talk about the topic at hand, why we're doing this workshop today. And it's a hot topic. It's a topic that every single one of us, we're hypersensitive to it, and that is security. And there's lots of reasons for it. I just went on Google today and just said, typed in a few keywords about security and breaches, and all these different things are coming up. Here's this one. More than 60% of organizations suffered a breach in the past 12 months. That is pretty amazing if you think about it. Actually, it says 63% here was the actual number. Every single one of us, we all have the mindset. We're trying to make our organizations as secure as possible. It's a super high level initiative at the top. Probably all of our bosses are always putting things in place or asking us to put things in place to make our organizations more secure. How about this one, Cash App? They just notified 8.2 million people that they had a data breach. So that's not great. I tell you, well, I won't tell you if I use it or not, but I'm assuming a lot of us do. So it's everywhere, right? It's at the consumer level. It's at the IT level. Of course, we just all went through and are still going through the Log4j saga. Chris, Ron, and I were just talking about WannaCry a few minutes ago, the one from a few years back, but there's always going to be a new one. When we get through Log4j, there'll be another one coming up. It's just the nature of the beast right now. How about this one? Look at this headline from Forbes. Why ransomware on hospitals is one of the greatest dangers of our time. I mean, think about the critical systems that we have, and if something like ransomware can take hold of your endpoint, how devastating that could be for, whether it's you have a production environment that can't go down, or something like healthcare where they need the computers to work to be able to help us, and, if we're in the hospital. So it's just critical that security is top of mind. And specifically around something like ransomware, endpoint security, we're going to be talking about one of our core technologies today, IGEL. So two of my really good friends here from IGEL are joining us, Ron Nair and Chris Feeney. I'll go ahead and introduce them. Ron Nair, he lives in Austin, Texas, maybe a couple other places based on what he was saying there.
Yeah, a nomad, yes.
Yes, no, nomad is the word. So Ron, go ahead and say hello.
Hey, all. I'm in Corrales, New Mexico today, and as you said, over 30 years of experience. I was at Apollo Computer and HP and stuff like that. I had workplace offering architecture and build at CSE and DXE for a long time as well. And when I saw the IGEL and technology, I told my wife, hey, if I ever have an opportunity to work at IGEL, I'm going to jump. And when it came, I jumped, and it's a great company, great. And all the people I work with are so super smart. It's a really great group.
And if you guys are active in the IGEL community, you definitely have probably talked to Ron, who's very active in the IGEL community. And I put here in the slide, he's the godfather of the IGEL custom partition store. In some circles, Ron is known as the custom partition guy. So he is, a wizard when it comes to creating custom partitions. We'll talk a little bit about that later on in the workshop here. And we're also joined by another good friend of mine, Chris Feeney, who Chris and I actually joined IGEL together 4 years ago. Chris, you want to say hello?
Hey, everybody. Yeah, it was the same week. Funny there, because my prior job, you were one of my customers, and the week we started, I saw your name. I was like, wait, why do I know that name? And I was just talking to you like the week before, and had no idea we were both going to IGEL. So yeah, it's been an interesting 4 years. I started here to cover federal, kind of get that business going after had some initial success there, and then we kind of really dug deep into it. And so I jumped into IGEL and going into a very highly secure environments. I'm still here to tell that we did have some success, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I know that, and I posted it this morning, if we could succeed in environments where the security is, very high in lockdown, I know, and we have already shown that we can succeed in environments where it's not so much, or trying to be as much. But yeah, very much excited about today's topic.
Very cool. Thank you, Chris. And yeah, it's a pretty funny story, right? How we met. And thank you for getting the memo on the blue shirts, Ron. Like I said.
Yeah, Ron, the sun hasn't come up yet in New Mexico, apparently. So we'll get the memo here in a minute.
Well, if anyone knows me, I wear black shirts, black pants. It's kind of a funny quirk. I've got, I think, 4 of these shirts, in the closet, and a couple pairs of pants, and that's it.
Yeah, well, most of my short sleeve shirts happen to be blue, so.
All right, so Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you. And guys, just so you know, the format today, obviously, Chris is going to share some high-level security features that you should know about with IGEL, and maybe you're unfamiliar with IGEL. So Chris is going to walk through that, and then after that, we're going to go into a live environment. We're going to show you how some just industry standard best practices that IGEL, it's going to be some field knowledge, IGEL documentation that we're taking this from, and just walking you through what are the things that we recommend you do to secure your endpoint. So Chris, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. I'm going to stop sharing here.
Fantastic. All right. Can you guys see this on your screen?
Yep.
Yeah, no surprise. I mean, about a year or so ago, I was in a meeting with a partner that was doing a lot of ransomware mitigation. And I finally just asked him, I said, when you go into these environments, what is it you're mitigating besides the obvious? Is it servers that are compromised, the cloud? Is it the endpoints? They get a lot of attacks on the endpoint. And so I'm like, okay, well, that's very interesting. And what are often the things that you're bringing up? And so the bad people know that if they can compromise that, right? I mean, who is going to get it? It's generally that one person there that is just trying to do their job, and unfortunately happens to pick the wrong day to click on that email or whatever it might be. And so the bad guys know that if they get the endpoint, they can deny service to the user's ability to work. walk up, I can't get to my workspace, therefore I can't serve customers, I can't serve patients, I can't do what I need to do. Or if it's more behind the scenes, they're still allowing you to work, but they're gathering a bunch of data, capturing it, and then eventually either closing their tracks, or they are found out, or something happens bad. We all know it. I would imagine that folks that are on this call have probably dealt with something like this. We don't need to go into details, but we just know that it is not a good place. And so one of the things that, like I said, when I started here, I knew I was going into environments where as soon as we put our software on a piece of device, whether that's repurposing a laptop that was previously, hard drive encryption, pre-boot authentication, all these heavy security and malware, all this stuff that you would normally put onto a local hard drive or local operating system. What changed by just switching to IGEL? And one of the things that we began to talk about was, some of the key security functions right out of the gate, just by putting IGEL on the device. And one of my first meetings with the watchdog of Congress, I'll just say that's what they do. It was me, rookie IGEL SC, who knew IGEL. I wasn't new to IGEL, but I couldn't certainly answer all the questions. So I had a good friend there to help walk me through some of these things. But it was a conference room full of a lot of security folks and IT folks, and they asked a lot of questions around going from the known state, Windows and disk encryption and all this other stuff, to a new state, and what does IGEL Linux bring? And we talked a lot about some of these things. We'll hit upon them, but some of the benefits that they received was because we just literally switched what was installed on those devices. They knew that, all right, well, there's no local stuff on the endpoint. We don't have to worry about that. We're getting basically to a Citrix desktop. So that was already secured. Getting into that was already secure with multi-factor auth, either through like a token-based system with a PAN and a passcode kind of thing, or smart card authentication. But all these other things, just by switching the operating system, they didn't have to put antivirus on those, many other things. But I knew that if we could succeed at that, that was an unclassified environment. Then when I got into a very highly classified, drop everything off at the front door, you're going to be off the net, if you will, for all the time that you're inside these closed walls. We succeeded in there too. And the first thing they're going to do is scan your device. And a lot of them was like, where is the device? Like, we scanned for it, or we can't find it. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's right here. Here's the IP address. What's not coming up? And it was because there are just very little ports that they can see. And really for us, it was the one port that's being used to manage the device from the tool, our management system. And then of course they want to say, well, let's get in the system and let's see what's there. And so we would allow for them to do a credentialed scan, and then they would see what's inside the box, versions of stuff and whatever. And they'd come back and they'd say, what about this? And we'd be able to answer it very easily in most cases. Some of the things we'll talk about today in the live presentation, but really understanding what IGEL is, it is secured Linux. It is essentially our own distribution. We borrow heavily from Ubuntu and Debian and that type of thing. And we've kind of made it IGELized. We take the mainstream Linux kernel and we kind of incorporate the pieces that we need, especially with some of the newer hardware stuff that we're able to support with our IGEL Ready program. But at the end of the day, it's IGELized, if you will, and then and the ability to manage that is really the key thing. And so, if you're not familiar already, these are the ways you can get IGEL onto a device. You can certainly repurpose existing hardware. You could, under certain requirements, right? Then you can use the UD Pocket device. The new one, as you can see on the screen, has either a USB-A or C option. There are use cases for that very often. Or you can go through one of our IGEL Ready hardware partners, and the list literally is growing almost by the week. We have new endpoint vendors from different parts of the globe coming into the system, getting certain devices, laptops, thin clients, all-in-ones, and so forth. So that's an ever-growing list. If you blink, you're going to miss somebody that you may have been keeping your eye on. They might be joining IGEL Ready and you didn't know it. But it's not just the endpoint, it's all the other stuff that you would plug into the device that you would want it to work as well. And so that's a huge part of our success, certainly the last 4 years. There is a bunch of stuff out there. If you want to peruse some of this later on our website, we have videos, tip sheets, app notes, KB articles, infographics. If you need to explain, to your folks, hey, what is IGEL? What do we do? What do we offer? That type of thing. So we're not going to go into all these things, but just wanted to at least understand sort of some of the key points about IGEL and the resources available to you at this web URL up above. We'll talk with you a little bit more about some of this, but this is really sort of some of the key points. That minimal attack surface, that was the one thing that for me came up almost right out of the gate when I first started here. Every account I went into in Federal, before we touched VMware or Citrix or whatever, they would say, let's scan the device and make sure we're good before we go any further. And once we kind of got through that, then it was, okay, now let's talk through all the other things that you can do. So we'll hit upon some of these things and how we can kind of keep the endpoint secure, regardless of whether it's on-prem or remote. Certainly, guys, chime in as we're going along. But let's talk through some of the key things. IGEL is so customizable. You can pop up multiple use cases. This one here, this appliance kiosk mode, right? If that's the only thing you want the user to see, no access to the local desktop, just here's a login screen to get into your environment, be it a browser, the Citrix client, VMware client, whatever, and then that's all they get to get into. We have extensive peripheral control. We were just talking about that before we got started, sort of the pros and cons to how to handle that type of thing. We'll talk about when a session's over, what do I do? We can take actions. We know what just happened. We can do stuff there. There's some really cool functionality there if you've not been familiar with it before. And because we're a modular based operating system, we can remove stuff that you don't need. And what's actually really cool is our new version that's coming out soon is going to start off very similar to like a mobile phone. I'll just take iPhone. You get the base operating system, and then you put the things on there that you want. Whereas today, IGEL comes out with firmware, and we've got stuff baked in that you can then remove. And those things would be browser, workspace stuff, so it's sort of a kind of a reverse thing. We're not going to go into those details today, but just know that it's the security will still be there, and then you can kind of add the things that you want. And then this tamper-proof, this is really sort of the key things, right? I mean, how do I know that the operating system can be trusted when I boot this thing up, whether it's from the UD Pocket or I just installed it on this laptop or from the IGEL Ready vendor, whatever it might be? There is a chain of trust that it happens as the operating system is going through the boot up process. And then our development team, we sign our partitions. So we check that during the process to make sure that nothing's been tampered or inaccessible. And so if it is, we have ways to prevent the boot up, or you can always, reset the device and kind of start back over. It's very hard to even have that happen, especially if you lock the device down and nobody can really make changes to it as far as end user. So, and then of course, when you're updating the device, we have a process to make sure that the firmware actually finishes doing what it needs, and it doesn't completely go to the new firmware until it's finished installing. So if you haven't ever seen this, we certainly have IGEL devices, and through our partnership with AMD, there is a chip check during the chain of the boot up chain here process, and then it goes through the UEFI bootloader kernel. Then it checks our IGEL partitions, and then once you're up and running, you can get into your environment VDI cloud offer, and then of course those connections are secured through the normal means that you might expect. If it's not an IGEL device like a UD3 or 7, then that check at the chip level is not necessarily happening, but you're still going through all the other stuff. And this would be true for repurposing devices, a UD Pocket, or some of our IGEL ready vendors. So real briefly, as we talk through sort of how these things work, this is just sort of a general process of how the firmware signed by IGEL, so you know it's our software. When you process that and you begin the update, there's in this, you know, you could Ron, what I'm thinking about here is scenarios where you can say, all right, I'm only going to push out certain parts of the firmware because I don't need this, that, or the other. So only those components could be installed. Once you have sort of your base system, you can put a profile on there and say, all right, when I update this, I'm only updating these things and I don't need the rest of it. Later on, if you say, you know what, we actually just bought a company, they use VMware, we were all Citrix, so we need to allow for that. Then you could say, all right, we're going to add the VMware piece back into that firmware, and then it goes through and installs that component. But it would go through this process before it finally is ready to be used on the new firmware. All right. There are some stuff in the chat, so I wasn't sure if there's any questions. I'll pause here. Nope, just Ron has pointed out some links. IGELready.com/ready. If you're not familiar with our IGEL Ready program, some really great things happening there. And of course, the IGEL community, which is a wealth of information. I would be interested, a poll, let's take a poll. Just chime in yes or no if you are familiar with IGEL community. Are you very active in there? I'll just kind of pause and see what responses we get, yes or no. Fire away when you're ready. It might be prizes, by the way. No promises there. All right. Yeses are coming in. Very good. By the way, for those that are coming from the West Coast, thanks for chiming in early in your day. Looks like we've got a lot of yeses there. So awesome. Hope you're finding great value there. Wanted to just kind of quickly talk through some of this, right? So we'll get into the specifics, right? How you can remove certain features. But this is just sort of a high level thing. There's also some really cool things, right? Some of these vendors that we work with in the IGEL Ready program have some really cool technology if you happen to be using or need a little bit more advanced functionality around devices. We won't be going into the specifics on those today, but just know that it's more, it's IGEL plus, right? It's not just us, it's us succeeding with our Ready vendors. I'm going to pause here because Ron certainly has dealt with this, especially with custom partitions or something like that. But there is a feature, a Linux top technology called App Armor that can also prevent an application from accessing certain parts of the device. So Ron, wanted to give you a chance to maybe chime in on App Armor and what your experience has been if you're adding a custom partition or whatever.
Yeah, so you know, some of the stuff with the custom partitions, you know, App Armor helps control what can start up. So if you were in a browser and you clicked on a link that tried to start something up, by default, it's not going to allow it to start up. And with the custom partitions, you can, if you're putting something on like that, then you can configure the App Armor profile to allow that link to, you know, to open up. So if you're opening up Microsoft Teams locally or some other local app, you can have it go through that.
Yeah, so a good point would be, let's say I'm using Firefox, Chromium that we have built in, or Microsoft Edge, and I also have the Zoom Linux client installed. I go to office.com, I click on the calendar link, I click on the link to start Zoom, and then I get that prompt, do you want to, you know, launch this application? locally, which is Zoom in this case, that would be a scenario where you're allowing App Armor, for example, to interact. Is that accurate, Ron? That's my general
Yeah,
understanding.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. By default, we have it set and locked down that those kind of things can't occur. And so if you're doing a custom partition or something for that, you can enable and allow App Armor to recognize it as a valid request and allow it to process.
Awesome. Moving right along, when I first came to IGEL with Patrick, this was the version that was just coming out, 10.04, from my recollection. Or maybe it was Patrick, was that right? That seems right.
That sounds right to me, but man, that's a tough question.
But this secure boot concept, right? Because I started running into that on federal, right, where some devices had secure boot, and so talking with our security folks, really, what does that mean? And we basically have a trusted certificate from Microsoft, whatever it says, yeah, that operating system, you can trust it when it boots. So we've had that in the product for as long as I've been here. This we're not going to get into, but we added this functionality, right? You say, well, if it's a read-only operating system, why would you need disk encryption? I thought you just said you didn't need that from the federal account that you worked with some time ago. That answer was true, but you know, you get enough people asking for something like this or a specific use case, maybe they do want it. This does exist. We're not going to go into the specifics today on how to set it up. We do have information. We might want to potentially do a deeper dive on that next time or whatever in the future. But since 11.01, we did add this this functionality. And then, as you might expect, there are certain parts of the operating system where you can do additional things in cryptographic signatures. And so we added this functionality in 11.03, just so you're aware. 11.07 is our most current release. So this is going back at least a couple of years, maybe a year or two. I don't know, something like that. But then, not to be outdone, in 11.06, hey, guess what? That pre-boot authentication that you didn't need before, hey, if you want it, there it is. So, you know, again, a lot of this is coming down to what's the right balance of security versus convenience. And so another thing that I don't know if you're in this world, I was for a time, but Fips 140-2 compliance. And so the applications that you see there, the Workspace app Horizon, they are already compliant with that or going to Fips mode. But the general answer here is that because IGEL takes the kernel from Linux and we IGELize it so we can work with different vendors or their hardware and that type of thing, the general process is if you go through this is that you submit a version of your product that gets, you know, 2 years later, it comes back and finally they say, yeah, you're good to go. By then, I mean, look at how many features and functions and updates we've had since then, you know, so we've never really chosen to go down this path. But I think what we're saying is certainly IGEL from a security perspective is very much a built from the ground up with security in mind. So if this does come up, you have questions about it, certainly bring it to Zentegra's attention. We're happy to talk through it or provide you guidance on this. Finally, this certainly can come up. We started doing complete pen testing of the product portfolio. Now we're in 2022, so just over 2 years ago. And so this kind of happens on a regular basis. And so, of course, if something comes up, like what we were just talking about, Log4j, if it happens to, the security team is really pretty top notch. They are always aware of these things and either A, will let us know, hey, we're working on this, or this part of the product is not affected, or here is a way to mitigate it or something. And then they come out with some update to whatever it might be if need be. So, and then we're talking about the management. We'll get into this, right? Are we secure in how we communicate with the devices? What certificates, hashing are we using? But the answer is yes, and there's certainly security ciphers that we can go into inside of UMS to show, hey, what is being used when we are communicating with the devices to make sure that, you know, it's not a rogue system taking over and, you know, doing nefarious things. There's also this, I'll just kind of highlight a couple things. Our software design, consistency, prevent regressions. This is now going back at least 3 years, probably, maybe 4. But this came up for me on the federal side. Our security team had signed up for this and is using this Secure Suite membership to, you know, stay on top of things like when we do enable SSH or something, you know, we're going through and checking permissions and other types of things. But this is a very active part of what IGEL in terms of the development team goes through behind the scenes. So that is kind of in a nutshell, sort of some high level things. We'll kind of pause there because I think we're ready to maybe get into some of the meat of what we're doing. So let me stop sharing here, Patrick. And if there's any questions, let's see here. Do not see anything in the chat at the moment. We do have a QA thing. I think if somebody wants to try that out, you can put a question there and we can try to answer it during the time we've got. So, all right. So,
all right. Well, Chris, thanks, man. That's you know, thank you for the overview and guys, you know, just a couple announcements I didn't make at the outset, but I just want to make sure you're aware. Obviously, we're being a lunch and learn workshop. You're going to be getting your Grubhub gift card if you haven't already. So Claire is in the process of sending that out. Just one thing to note, it does expire by the end of today. So make sure if you don't eat lunch with it, you know, order dinner or a fourth meal or whatever, late night snack, whatever you want to do. But just know that it's going to expire at midnight. And one other thing here, I'm going to put a poll in the out to you guys. One thing we've been talking through, because we're doing this monthly, you know, is what are you guys interested in? You know, what are the topics that you want to see? Obviously, we're in a minute here, we're going to go into the UMS live and we're going to really start to configure some different options and talk through them and, you know, just show you how things work. But we definitely want to hear back from you guys. So I'm going to put a poll out here. And I'd ask you to just, you know, check. It's going to be a multiple choice poll. Just check the options that you're definitely interested in. If you're not, leave it unchecked, obviously. But let me go ahead and launch that. And I just want to see what you guys are interested in. I put 10 of them in here. That we could probably, it was 10 was the limit. I could have had more. But these were ones that I definitely thought would probably be interesting to you guys. So please give us your feedback. And I'll go ahead and get the demo going here as you guys are answering that. Wow, looks like customizing is a big one. Right, I'll share here as you guys are answering that question.
Are you able to show the results of the poll?
I think I can show them. Let me, this is kind of a first time for me sending this out there on Zoom. So we'll give a few more minutes. We'll give everybody till about, we'll give one more minute. You guys could, so far the customizing, the IGEL OS is a big one, and Citrix, VMware, Microsoft, Amazon configurations. I mean, obviously those are very, very, you know, well, one is really cool, just being able to customize. And the other one is critical to what we all do for a living.
Yeah, I want to say when I first got here, the community had a contest on the skinning up IGEL, right? And so you had some folks go all out, made it look like an Apple device. Some made it look like a Microsoft Windows machine. I mean, just some really cool ways to, you know, present it to the user. So they're like, oh, this looks just like mine. They have no idea that it's actually IGEL because they've, you know, they've made the changes to it to make it look like something that they're used to. So some pretty cool stuff.
All right, I'm going to give 10 more seconds here. Speak now or forever hold your peace on the poll. Wow, some good feedback here.
All right.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and end it.
And the most requested poll. Let's see what we got here. Oh, hang on. Almost a neck and neck there.
Customizing
I
the
didn't
OS.
want to.
Yeah.
I didn't want to influence the custom partition stuff, but no, maybe I should have. No, that's my little baby. But
Oh, Doug
usually, what we
Brown, I'm
do with
sorry, buddy.
that's okay. Usually, what we do with custom partitions is you got use cases where your customer is saying, hey, we want to do this to control a manufacturing line with SCADA devices, or we wanted to control cameras in command and control type stuff. So what we do with the custom partitions is if there's software available on Linux, we can work to build a custom partition that would run natively on the IGEL endpoint. So you could deploy those systems if it's oil and gas rigs or manufacturing shop floor lines or whatever, and not need a VDI backend to run it if you've got native Linux apps. But
Yeah, that's interesting, right? So we talk a lot about VDI and getting into that, but a few weeks back was at I guess it was some event, and these folks came by and said, all I need is like an AS400 terminal thing, because we use that, or IBM, whatever it was. And so we have that built in. We also have this other thing called PowerTerm, which is a little bit more robust and maybe feature rich. And they're like, really? And yeah, what do you need? Well, we get an uptick in people during the Christmas holidays, and we need more people to access that. And so there's a lot more to IGEL than just getting into a Horizon or a Citrix or Microsoft environment. So if you have those use cases, happy to explore them with you as well. So Patrick, you have the floor. Let's rock and roll here.
Great. You guys see my UMS?
Yes, we can.
All right. Very good. Very good. All right. So guys, thank you again for that poll. I mean, that's really good feedback. Gives us some good, some good feedback on how we want to go forward here. But, we're going to walk through some of this together here. This is my UMS console. The whole point of these workshops is, you guys see us doing this. You see us configuring things. Let's see. And, if we're looking at my device here, if I right click and shadow this guy, you'll see it's just, it's actually an LG Gram, great device to use. But, if you're not familiar with IGEL, think of IGEL as, it can be any device that's x86, 2 gigs of RAM, 2 gigs of hard drive space. So there's a whole, whole nother topic, whole bunch of devices on igel.com/ready. where you can look at the IGEL Ready program and see what's available there. But as far as what IGEL is, I mean, right now you're just seeing a really simple desktop. I'm presenting a Zentegra wallpaper. I've edited my little start button to make it look like Windows. Maybe your end users will feel more comfortable at that point. And I'm just giving it a Citrix application and a Chromium browser, and that's it. Really simple. Most of the time, us as IGEL admins, that's what we do, right? We give, we'll give, our end users a real simple workflow, and it works great, and it's simple, and they love it, and we say, okay, we're done, and we walk away. The problem is, there's a lot of really great security features you can put in place, things that we highly, highly recommend you do in order to lock this thing down, harden it, make it as secure as possible. With, and again, when we talk about this, the debate is always around, security and end user experience. It's always going to be a balance, but we want to at least show you what your options are and show you what our best practices are. And then we'll show you a few optional things too that we say, hey, maybe you want to try this, but will it be more secure? Yes, but your users may not have as good of an experience. So let's walk through that. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm just going to create what's called as a profile. And think of a profile as, settings or a workflow that you're sending down to the device. So I'm going to right click here. I'm going to create a new profile. We'll call it IGEL OS security. Okay. You can always pick your what version of the OS you want to base it on. I'm going to do latest greatest 11.07.130. I'm going to hit OK. And if you're familiar with IGEL, you're in here all the time. If you're not, think of the operating system as it's a read-only sandboxed operating system where you as the admin have control over what settings are enabled or disabled, activated, given values, whatever, all from this one management console, the UMS console. Universal Management Suite. And so specifically when we get into security settings, I'm just going to kind of walk through some of the ones that I always recommend customers use. Some of them are coming from the IGEL white paper. Some of them are just field experience, things that we recommend. And but I'll say this, the number one thing when you talk about security that you should probably consider is obviously keeping everything up to date. So IGEL OS comes out with updates generally quarterly. Historically, that's how their firmwares update. You can download them from IGEL's website. You can also download them from right from the UMS console if you have access out to IGEL's firmware repository. So it's always good, especially the UMS. Keep that updated because there's always critical security fixes, new features, things like that with every build. So obviously that if you're using IGEL Cloud Gateway, which is designed for remote management of devices, the work from home users, maybe a site that's not plugged into your WAN, doesn't have a VPN connection, you can still manage those devices over the internet with ICG, IGEL Cloud Gateway. And you're going to keep that one up to date as well. And of course, the operating system updates come out quarterly. Make sure you're keeping things up to date, testing as you go with the OS, but security fixes are always going into place. And you can always look at igel.com/software-downloads, and you can look at all of the release notes. You can also see them in the UMS here. So that's kind of the most obvious thing just to kind of say from the outset. But let's say you're up to date, everything's good, and you've just deployed IGEL OS or you're about to deploy it, and now you want to make sure your security settings are in place. So let's talk about the most important one out there, in my opinion. And let's start with, if we go to the security section here, we're going to go to password, and we're going to talk about the local admin. So in Linux terminology, if you're familiar with Linux, the Linux admin in the operating system is called root. And this is the elevated access user. So we 100%, and unfortunately, I think a lot of users don't have this one set a lot of times, but you want to make sure you have an admin password set on your devices. And the way you're going to do that is you're just going to hit this little triangle here. Okay, that activates the setting to blue. And I'm going to check the box to use a password. Okay, and then I'm going to go in there, I'm going to type in, a password, and you want to make it obviously a long, complex one. But you can set this, whether you have 100 devices or 100,000 devices, you can create a profile with an admin password and push it to all of them. And then that gives you the ability from the UMS to, as you go, change the admin password. If you want to change it every week, every other day, you go right in here, you make that change, that pushes out to everything. And that's going to be the number one thing you're going to want to do, okay? Because some of the other things we're talking through, like accessing the local setup, different things with the terminal, you're going to immediately lock down and restrict access no matter what you give to your user, because they're not going to be able to get into certain areas of the OS that require admin privileges. So number one, absolutely set up a root password, an admin password, and it's that simple. Just checking a box and setting it, and then applying that profile.
Patrick, I was just thinking about this. It probably would be a good opportunity to, in terms of the profiles, to highlight the master profile option. Yeah, because I saw that. I remember walking into a Navy account, and I had never seen master profiles used in production until I went to there, and I was like, "What are you using these for?" And he showed me, and one of the first things he has, he has a master profile at his very top level that had that password controlling and some other things too. But I was like, okay. And then he had the normal green profiles, but that's how he was using it among other things too. But it was pretty neat to kind of see how they were doing that.
Yeah, and I think, Chris, to your point, when we're talking about a root password, right? Let me just save this real quick. We'll come back to it. Right here, if you look at my directory structure, I have all kinds of different firmware customizations, profiles. The rule of thumb in the UMS is the closer a profile is to the device, that takes precedence. So let's say, for example, I don't have a root password set up here at my branches area, but then down here at the Zentegra, the XT directory, I do have a root password. This profile is going to take precedence. Now, a master profile is the exact opposite. You put a master profile at the top level, and it's going to override everything under it, no matter what. So when you're talking about a root password, it's not going to allow anybody to turn the root password off, maybe a different admin. And you'd have to do this. You'd have to come into UMS and let's see if I can find it on the fly here.
It's on the bottom, UMS features, I believe.
UMS features, there we go. And you would just enable this guy here, enable master profiles. You'll get kind of yelled at, I believe, when you save it. Maybe that's templates that yells at you. And then from here, you can create a master profile that's going to look the same, but the difference is you can put it at the high level and it's going to override everything. So it's a great call out there. And from a security standpoint, having that peace of mind that your master profile is going to override everything no matter what's pushed. So let's go back here. But by the way, one thing to always note when you do create a profile in IGEL and you go in and edit the profile, the nice thing about it is whatever's changed here is going to be highlighted in blue. So it's always easy to go back and see, hey, what changed here? What did I configure? Just as a quick call out there. So obviously the admin password is crucial. There's other users here. They're not going to be quite as crucial. The regular user account is just the standard account that auto logs into the IGEL OS. I don't recommend giving that a password. There's really not any reason to do it. But that's a whole nother topic. But the root password is the key here. That's the one you want to definitely have set. A couple other things in this area I'll just kind of touch on. This is a new feature, this device encryption. You can set this up actually from the welcome screen when you first set up IGEL. But if you want to do it from the UMS, you can set a local password on the device that the user would need. It's a pretty cool feature. We're not going to go too in depth here, but just know that that's a new feature and that's there. So you can kind of encrypt that local OS with a password, so no one can get out of it. Another thing to consider is you have different logon options here. One of them, it might be obviously just a basic security feature, is that IGEL natively logs into Active Directory. So while IGEL doesn't become domain joined, you don't join IGEL to your domain, you can enable a local login that will authenticate against Active Directory via Kerberos. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, if you do it it's an ICG device, you can also leverage LDAP via the UMS if you don't have access to Kerberos locally, if you're, let's say, a work from home user. So it's a really cool feature. And obviously that gives you that local Windows login, which is, obviously going to be a little more secure if you can make that work. The nice thing when you're using Kerberos is if you log into the AD authentication first, you can use pass-through authentication with something like a Citrix. And I'll show you that up here under your Citrix options. I might be down under storefront login. You have this pass-through authentication option. You check this on, it's actually going to pass your AD credentials through to Citrix. So when you launch the Citrix app, it just logs you in via AD. But we're not going to touch on that too much. Okay, so AD, obviously a big one. But a couple other things. These are ones that, as I usually when I do micro assessments with customers, you'll see that a lot of times people have these other ones turned on by default, but we always recommend turning them off. One of them, if you go down to System and go down to Remote Access, is SSH. Now, SSH is enabled by default in the IGEL OS, and it's labeled with a little asterisk, right? You'd have to get to it from a specific user, and there has to be a password enabled. So the area I showed you up here, where you set a password, you would have to set up a password for one of these users. The user for remote access, for example, would have to have a password in order to be able to SSH. Without the password, SSH doesn't work. However, as a best practice, I would always recommend going into this SSH access area, enable the setting, and just turn it off. If you need SSH access to a specific device or specific groups of devices, you can, again, enable that on that one device via profile for a specific device or for a specific directory. But chances are you're going to want this turned off for most of your devices in your environment. It's just a best practice. So we'll go ahead and disable that.
So Patrick, you might want to talk about what I see sometimes too is I see these mother of all profiles that have everything in the kitchen sink in one profile, and it's like, about kind of breaking them into smaller pieces as well, where it makes
that's
sense.
that's a great point, Ron. Kind of as a demo here, I'm just building it as one profile to show it to you guys. But if I was doing this in production, I might have a security settings profile where I have a few of these things checked. But something like disable SSH, I would probably make that its own profile. And the reason for that is it just keeps it more organized. And, if let's say something isn't working, you're having a troubleshoot, it's much, much easier to isolate it to one profile as opposed to one just massive albatross of, 100 settings activated and changed. So it's always very difficult to troubleshoot in that type of environment. Usually the first thing I'll do with a customer is say, hey, let's just break this up. Let's break it up into different profiles, rebuild them. And I don't know, Ron, I don't know if you see the same thing in your experience there.
Yeah, doing that. The other thing we see, and especially larger enterprises, is that they have, a sandbox, test, QA, and production kind of environments, right? So they may have a test development environment where they've got their own UMS and stuff set up for test and dev, and they do their testing and the new versions of things come out. And if it looks good, then they move it to pre-prod and have, certain users and stuff that run through the pre-prod. Once that's signed off, then they follow their change management to export those profiles or settings and import them into production during their change window, right? So that you're not kind of going back and saying, okay, what changed in production, right? So you have those various things, sandbox, QA, and then production. And in production, they're not editing profiles. All they're doing is importing profiles and maybe some other kind of settings, but the core settings and changes, they never edit profiles in production. They do it in their QA environment, do their testing, export that profile, and then during their change window for production change window is they import that profile into production and go. So they have kind of those workflows around it. We see that with some of the larger enterprises as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. And it's always better to use that type of approach, right? It's so much cleaner, and then just keep it nice and simple for you as the admin. So obviously this is SSH. A couple other options here I just want to highlight. Specifically around shadowing. And again, I would create this. I usually create a separate shadow profile. But when you enable shadowing, there's one up here called secure mode, and this is secure shadowing. I always enable this. I always recommend enabling this. Essentially, what this is going to do is it's going to force any shadow attempt. So IGEL uses a secure VNC that's over TLS, but it's going to force it to come from a UMS console with a valid UMS user. So in other words, it's not going to allow you to use a third-party VNC viewer. So I always recommend turning this on, and to ensure that there's no other way someone would be able to shadow one of your devices, even if they knew a device or a user password. They would have to be in the UMS console to do it. So it's just a best practice to turn this one on. The other one is, we're going to talk about in a few minutes here, removing applications, something like not allowing your users to get to a terminal. There's another great feature here called Secure Terminal. And it's going to kind of do a similar thing as secure shadowing, only it allows you to open up a secure terminal session from the UMS. So you right-click the device, you tell it to secure terminal, and you can get in the terminal, sue up to root, and take a look at logs or whatever you want to do to troubleshoot. So it's a really great feature. But I would recommend remove the local terminal, or at least the user's access to it. And if you need to terminal, turn this on. Use this as a separate profile. And maybe, what I've seen some customers do is they have this off by default, but what they'll do is if they need to troubleshoot on a device or pull logs or look at logs, they'll have this profile created. They'll just drag and drop it onto one device and then right click and secure terminal. So it's a really great feature and a great way to, have terminal access without having it on the endpoint. All right.
So while we're on this topic, I was actually checking for secure shadowing on our KB. I found this interesting article. I honestly had somehow missed it before, but the port that we're using for shadowing and secure terminal, you can actually configure a timeout on it. And so this article kind of talks about how you can use a variable and put a range in there from 0 to 180 seconds, essentially. I've never used it before, but if that is of a concern or something like that, or it does come up and questions, whatever, just know that it is possible to put a timeout on the port that we're using there. So anyways, and there's some other articles out there under security that maybe are beyond just the point and click, but also maybe a little bit more detail. This was the one I was actually looking for on the secure shadowing. Just kind of gives you a little bit more detail about the ins and outs of it. What we're showing is actually how to set it up, but there's on the secure shadowing there. So
we had a question come in as well a few minutes ago. It says, can you utilize laps for local admin password if a device is added to AD?
The latter part of that question is an IGEL device will never be added into Active Directory. So the answer, I guess, to your first question is no.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, unfortunately, so IGEL devices are not domain joined. That authentication piece is actually something you enable, and it just does it Kerberos authentication. So the device is not domain joined. Think of UMS really as the mechanism where you would be able to push something similar to a group policy. But good question there.
Peter also asked a question about turning on in the UMS administration up high remote access. That is an option as well. It is under, I believe it's under miscellaneous. You know what I'm talking about?
Let me see. I'm going to pull up that question.
It's in the chat. It's not in the Q&A.
Oh, okay. Which one was it?
It was in the chat. I guess the remote access piece, there's a global shadowing option.
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So shadowing specifically, and really we could talk about more security options here. I always generally put shadowing on as a separate profile. Most customers that I've worked with, they enable it for everybody. They're utilizing shadowing for, troubleshooting. The help desk users will, get a call, they'll shadow a device. So yeah, I mean, you could absolutely turn it on globally for everybody. But there's a couple things I didn't mention here, and I know it's not your exact question, but there's other options here you guys should probably know for shadowing, like prompt user for remote session. So you can put security checks in there where if somebody right clicks and shadows a device, the end user actually has to say, yes, you're allowed to shadow me. Allow a user to disconnect. There's different things in there. So a couple things. Now, your question specifically around, let me save this guy. And you're talking about, if I go into UMS administration under remote access, if my eyes would work, here we go. So yeah, the secure, enable secure terminal globally. Is that the one we're talking about?
I think either that one or the one right below it, the secure VNC.
Oh, right here, enable secure VNC locally. That's interesting. I don't know. I've never used that feature or the checkbox. Chris or Ron, you guys have any idea? I'm assuming it's just going to turn it on for everybody.
In my own environment, I can't recall if any of my prior customers were using it, but you could turn that on as well in this location or through the profile option.
And then usually you're still turning on logging so you can see who's, logging of those sessions and things like that too for auditing, right? So.
Yeah. So from an auditing, this is generally what I'll do is I'll turn the log on. So this setting, on what I'm guessing, I've never used it to be completely transparent. I'm assuming it's just going to enable it globally so that you don't have to have a profile. But that's a good question. We'll maybe the next workshop will address questions that stumped us that we can come back and test on our end and go through.
Yeah, I think the point here is that you have places that you can do it, right? If in the company may decide we don't want to do it at the global level, we want to handle it, control it through a profile, whether it's a master or a regular profile.
So, and I think the best practice is just, do it via a profile, right? Give your admin the ability to manage it via the way you manage everything else, right? So that would be my recommendation either way on that setting. Okay, so let's kind of level set. So we talked about SSH, secure shadowing. Here's another one, guys. This is a really crucial setting that if you have this enabled in your environment, this is a big one to make sure you turn off. So if I go down here to we're going to talk about the local console. If I go to user interface, and it's in a weird place, I don't ever understood why it was here, but if I go to display and options, oh no, I'm wrong. It's where is it? It's in display and access control. Display and access control. There's a setting here that's automatically, it's off by default, and it's disable console switching. So, you know, if you're familiar with Ubuntu or any Linux distro, there's always a hotkey to get into the local console. In IGEL, if you hit Control Alt F11, it actually launches. You go from the GUI version of the OS into a console, and you can go in and you know, log in as a certain user. If they, you know, if you don't have a local admin password, that's not a good thing, because they could go in and log in as local root. But what you can do is you can just turn that off. And if you're sitting by an IGEL device, you know, the quickest way to test it, hit Control Alt F11 on the device. If it takes you to a terminal, you know it's enabled. The way to get out of it is Control Alt F1. But if you hit this option here, that actually just disables that whole feature. It removes the ability for the end user to break into that local console. So this is a crucial one. One that we absolutely recommend you turn off. So we'll go ahead and disable that one. Now, similarly, you might not want to have the end user the ability to have, you know, the access to something like local setup or local terminal. And so what we recommend doing is, if you go up here to accessories, you know, accessories in IGEL terminology is really like a utility in Windows terminology. So you have all of these different things, right? So if I go up here, for example, to terminals, now you'll see by default, terminal is not there. But if I hit plus, I can go in, I can do something like, you know, make sure it's unchecked from every single location. Okay. But I might, you know, maybe you don't need that. Maybe that's overkill. Maybe you say, okay, I don't want the users to really see it, but maybe if my local admins go up and they right click on the desktop, they'll have the option to hit it there. They know it's there. There's a root password set, so I'll give them the option. So you could do that. Desktop context menu, that's what that is. You right click on the desktop wallpaper and a little menu bar pops up. But, you know, generally speaking, recommend you just make sure it's not there. Make sure there's no hotkey set, and make sure that it's just totally disabled for everybody. One of the other ones that we recommend that for is the local setup. By default, actually, local setup is going to be in your quick start panel, which is down in your taskbar at the bottom of the screen. It's going to be in a couple other places. Now, and there's a hotkey set, Control S. Now, I've always taken the approach, number one, if you have the root password set and you have that, you know, published to any of these places, whether it's the desktop or the quick start panel, if root password is set, when you go to launch it, it's going to prompt you for a password. So that's not a huge deal. However, you know, you might be erring on the side of caution. You could just remove all of them, just uncheck, and it just unpublishes it from those areas in the operating system. Your users won't even see it. So it's kind of two layers of protection there. A, they can't access it. B, even if they could, there's the root password in place. Don't worry about it. So that's another one. So, you know, you might want to go through these accessories. There's all kinds of different utilities. You have a disk utility, and they're enabled by default in certain areas. A lot of times I say, hey, maybe you should just disable everything you don't want your end users to see. Just check and remove it, right? So I highly recommend you go through all of these accessories and just check where they're published to. And the way you would remove it is hit the triangle blue and uncheck it. So that's definitely a big one there. Now, another thing, when you're talking about removing features, the IGEL OS, as Chris pointed out earlier, is a modular operating system. Now, what that means is the system is, you know, the OS, everything is baked into the operating system already. However, they're baked into different partitions in the operating system. So one way to just totally minimize your attack vector is to remove any unused features that, you know, are in the OS that you know you're not going to need. And there's really two advantages to that. So if I go down here to System, and then I go to, I gotta go down a little further, Firmware Customization, and go to Features, you see all the different things that are built in. For example, Amazon Workspaces client. You know, you have, you know, Cafe Wireless. I would not recommend turning some of them off, like Cafe Wireless, but maybe you don't need Cisco WebEx. Maybe you're just a Citrix customer and you don't need Amazon. You don't need Azure Virtual Desktop. You don't need VMware if you're just a Citrix customer. So you would go through and you could actually activate these and uncheck them, uncheck all the ones that you don't want. And the two advantages there is that application is no longer in the OS. So if there was an exploit in it, it's not just sitting idle in your operating system. So it's just that, even though it's extremely unlikely that would happen, you remove it anyway. Just again, take the cautious approach. The other reason,
or the other thing too is, really to minimize, your firmware updates, right?
Exactly.
To say, because in the release notes, you can go into the release notes and we show what the size is of all of these things here. So maybe turning something off, that's only 200K isn't going to make a big difference. But, the larger ones, you could look at that and say, hey, 80% of my footprint are coming from these 3 or 4, apps, right?
No, Ron, that's a huge point there, right? I mean, that's when you're talking about, firmware updates. Again, the OS is relatively light. I mean, it's, about 2 gigs in size. I think it's a little over now. So it's a super lightweight OS, but if you watch your firmware update process, what happens is it downloads the firmware update and then it updates each partition. Now, if you remove, let's say your Citrix and you remove Amazon, AVD, and VMware, those are 3 pretty large applications right there. So when it does the firmware update, it only needs to update the partition for Citrix and whatever is checked on here, and it doesn't even address the other ones. So it makes that process way faster than it already is and keeps your OS lighter. So just a huge feature. A lot of people don't realize that this exists, and it's a great feature to take advantage of if you're not doing it.
On this note, I think we touched on it maybe on our last webinar when talking about installing IGEL with our OS Creator tool, for example. They added a function there now when you're creating that OS tool, you can actually uncheck what features you want to be imaged on your device. If this is going to be the device you're going to boot to install IGEL, you can, with the wizard, you can actually go and say, well, I only need these things. I don't need all this other stuff. And so then when you go around and if you're doing the sneaker net approach or whatever, you can install it, and then it's only going to install those things right out of the gate. So there's a scenario there that might be of use, but it's a similar idea here with OS 11.
Yeah, and that's nice too, Chris, because it keeps the OS lighter from the get-go. It's probably worth mentioning, like let's say you do what Chris is saying, you turn all the features you don't want off in the OS Creator, and then a year from now you're like, oh wait, I need VMware. Maybe we're looking at VMware, we're going to do a POC. The nice thing is you could go back into the section here. You would scroll down, check the box back on, save it, and then after that do a firmware update. And what that'll do is it'll include that partition back into the OS. So there's a lot of flexibility here, but just know that this exists, and this is a huge way to just minimize your footprint, make it more secure, faster updates. There's so many advantages here, and it's easy to turn on and off moving forward. And then since we're talking about VMware, Citrix, Amazon, all these different things. One thing, and the old IGEL security white paper, Chris and I were talking about this before we started the webinar. It used to have a recommendation there to use what's called appliance mode, and I'm gonna call this one out as this is a maybe option. This may work for you, but it may not. This is that example of being really secure, but maybe removing end user experience. If you go into sessions, there's a little section here called appliance mode. And essentially what this is going to do is it's going to lock down your device to only be able to access one thing. So if I enable this and I turn on, for example, Citrix, known as Citrix self-service, I would put the delivery URL here. What it would look like is I fire my IGEL device up, and all I see is my storefront login, and that's it. I log in with it. It's going to look very much like a storefront in the browser. I log in. I have my Workspaces, Citrix Workspace workflow, but I can't do anything else. I can't open up a local browser. I can't, launch VMware or a different session. It's only going to allow me one thing. Now, from a security standpoint, this is a great feature, and really, it might work for you. But I would just caution you, test it out. What you may find is it's not a good fit. Your end users may need a few more local utilities and things like that that aren't available when you turn appliance mode on. So we'll call that one as a caveat. And if you're in healthcare, Chris, you could probably speak to this better than anybody. Imprivata is actually natively in appliance mode. Now I know that there were rumors and that would be potentially changing. There would be a different mode. Is any, I don't want to throw you on the spot here, but is there any anything you can share there on the Imprivata piece for our healthcare folks on the call?
Yeah, so the Imprivata relationship's been about 10 years plus at this point. And when it was initially done, it was in this lockdown appliance mode, because back in the day, the initial thought was they're just going to get to a virtual desktop. That's all they need. And over the course of time, what's happened is realizing that there's additional workflow functionality use cases where that's not always the case. The appliance mode has been restrictive, like a jacket that maybe you're starting to grow out of, and so what we're looking at is a way to add some more flexibility. So that's what's happening right now. We can share more probably at a later time, but nothing to write home about at the moment.
Cool.
I'll say this: I'll just say it's a skunkworks project, so I can tell you more, but I'd have to kill you right after that. So sorry, we're not going there.
Well, and really the point there, Chris, and I think this is where it's applicable to everybody. The reality is when you turn that on, it's just so restrictive. It's great from security, but your users might need something like launch the local display utility or whatever. There's a million examples, or launch Firefox. And you kind of you lose that end user access. So just keep that in mind before you do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
A couple more I want to hit on here just to show you guys that I would recommend. And then we're going to turn it over to Ron. Ron has a couple really cool custom partitions that you may find extremely useful. I know in the past I've been asked about these things, but a couple more settings I want to show. One of them is under the devices area. There's a section down here called USB access control. I'm going to caution you before you enable this. Definitely you want to make sure this is configured properly. If you want to use this for testing in your lab, definitely do that before you put it into production. But basically the idea is you enable this and you can set rules to say, can devices even be plugged in and recognized by the OS? So you can deny rules. So my default rule might be allow. And then I might say, well, there's certain devices I don't want it. If I know the vid and the PID, I can put them in there. Let's say there's a certain, device that's out in your environment. You go, I don't want anybody plugging this in. You do it there, or you can do it by class rule. I can say deny, all printers, or whatever. There's all different class rules in here. Just the one thing to note is with Citrix USB access control, number one, this might not be necessary. So it's a little bit overkill. Also, you want to make sure you have the right configuration between the two of them. It can cause conflict when this is on and Citrix USB access control is on. So definitely want to consult with someone from IGEL or just reach out to us at Zentegra. We'd love to kind of help you with that. But I wanted you to know that it's there and it's an option. And then the last thing I want to touch on here, guys, this is huge. If you're, one of the things that's great about IGEL, compared to other thin client operating systems, maybe you've been a Dell Wise customer in the past, and you just had a traditional thin client. When you get into the IGEL world, the beauty is it's a full-blown OS with all kinds of great features. One of them being local browsers. Having historically always having one, which was Firefox, but now there's two browsers in the OS natively. It's Firefox and Chromium. So it's a great thing. I mean, some people, that's all they use. They just publish a browser and they point to Okta or they point to their Citrix storefront. So you can use that, but you can use it, for if you're, in healthcare or any other business that needs a, just a dashboard. Just publish a browser in full screen and display a dashboard. There's a lot of great uses for it. Or just allow people to get into Office 365 locally through the browser. So there's two of them, but here's the thing: when you put a browser in, you want to make sure that this thing is hardened, it's secure. And traditionally, when it was just Firefox, I would always get the complaint, people would say, I don't like Firefox. And I would ask them, well, why don't you like Firefox? And the number one answer I would get, not always, but the number one was, well, there's no way to manage it really. Well, that's not the case in IGEL OS. In IGEL OS, you have access to every single setting in that Firefox browser. And from a security standpoint, there's some that you definitely need to know about. Like, for example, the ability to turn on a proxy. You know, maybe this is something you want to do natively with the browser, proxy everything, you know, put all your traffic through a proxy. That's here. You could, you know, enable this. You can configure it. We won't get into that too much, but know that you can do that. And then there's a lot of great privacy settings here. So you can do things like, you know, clear private data every time the browser closes. So maybe you have a kiosk type device that users, they go in and you give them a browser, you know, it's a public device. You could have this set to where every time that browser closes, everything clears out all the data, it starts from scratch. You know, there's all kinds of different things to be cleared, browsing history, saved passwords. You can turn on private browsing so that it's always in private mode. All kinds of different stuff here you know, you can do in the privacy section. I also want to show you in the security section. This is a setting here that used to be off by default, I believe. You would have to enable it. Now it's enabled by default, but just know that you want to hide the local file system. So if somebody gets access to a browser and they figure out a way to you know, open up like a terminal window from it, or you know, a system window where they can view things. If you check this on hide local file system, there's no way for them to see anything on the OS. It's just totally blocked. That's a big one. They also have safe browsing and malware protection. These are optional as well. Native settings in Mozilla Firefox you can enable.
Yeah, this kind of goes back to our App Armor conversation earlier. App Armor is already applied to Firefox to restrict what it can do. But if you highlight those two options, you'll see, I think it's hard to read gray on gray. We should probably talk to our designers about that, but but I think it's safe browsing and malware protection. So, but and what's nice, I guess, the way this is laid out, if you go to our KB site, they lay out sort of the exact structure of how you see it here in the KB when you're going into the config guide. So you can kind of drill down to that specific setting and see what is exactly happening with safe browsing or whatever.
Yep. And you know, that's a great point. I mean, you know, anything you're looking at here, every setting, the knowledge base will give you at least lay it out that way. Sometimes with really great details. The ones where it doesn't have great detail, the IGEL community will usually fill those gaps in. So there's just tons of resources there. Brian, I don't know if you had something on this point.
I'll show some more of this when I do my little demo. So,
yeah, this is basically, you know, some basic stuff in the browser. What Ron's going to show you is really a great feature. So I'm going to make sure we have plenty of time for that. Let me knock out these last few sections here you want to know about. You know that you have encryption options here. You can, you know, force certain encryption. Now, the interesting thing in this section is the highest level is already selected, but if you wanted to tier it down, I don't know why you'd want to do that. You could, but just know that that's there. And then here's another great one. This is one that I think a lot of customers love to use. The menu toolbar option, being able to hide anything you want to hide in that browser. So let's say you only want the browser to see the the URL toolbar, right? You can hide bookmarks, hide the sidebar, hide navigation, on and on, all the tools, you know, just only allow your user to just see the URL input. Now, you could remove that if you want. There's some use cases where you start a browser in, you know, full screen mode and they don't have access to change where they're going. It just presents the situation we talked about earlier with having like a kiosk type thing, a display board. Maybe you'd want to do that. And you could, in window here, just check this box, start in full screen mode. And, you know, that would go ahead and do that. And then you could hide the URL input, hide print. You could hide all these things. So having the full control, it's just a big deal. Now, you kind of have all the same things in the Chromium browser. I won't take a ton of time here because we're kind of running out of real estate on this call, but, you know, just know that in the Chromium browser, you have a lot of those same features. If you go into Chromium Browser Global, you have a proxy option, privacy, You can, clear browsing data, do not track, all these different things, turn things on and off. What I will say is the Chromium browser, it's a newer thing. There's not as many options you'll notice as you go through here. However, you'll have a lot of them, for example, file access, again, turned off. Here's another great one. Telling your devices which types of applications can be downloaded. So you can kind of block which types of file extensions are allowed and not allowed, which is a great feature. And the other thing that's cool here, the menu toolbar options, but if you know Chromium really well, you can set up all kinds of different policies. So you go down to the policies area. There's great, if you Google, Chromium policies, there's really great resources out there. You can lock this down with Chromium policies with just policy names and give it a value and, really customize it. So I think that's kind of, that's it. There's a few other things we could touch on, but I want to give Ron a few minutes here. So let's see. So we have some things in the chat. Let me make sure there's no questions before we move on. Looks like we had a few.
I think we've got it.
We're answering. Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. All right. So great. So guys, so again, these are things that, these are just at a high level settings you want to enable. But I'm going to turn it over to Ron. What Ron is going to show you is taking a different approach, using another feature in IGEL called the custom partition, and pushing something to lock down security even more. So Ron, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and let you share out and take it from here.
All right, thanks. I'm just going to go ahead and share my whole screen. Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yep, we can see you, Ron.
Cool. Oops, hang on a second. Move this over here. So let me go ahead and hang on. Let me move this down here. This side. So again, we were talking about the IGEL community. So if you're not already a member, go ahead and join the IGEL community. We have that on Slack. There's over 8,000 members now. And even for myself, if I've got a question on how to do something, the first thing I look at is the knowledge base. If I don't find it there, I go to the IGEL community on Slack, and probably 99% of the time, even for myself, I find the answer. But anyway, there's the IGEL community, and then off of there we have stuff on getting started. There's blog posts, there's videos on how to do things, etc. One of the things that we have off the IGEL community is some content on GitHub. So on GitHub, we have stuff for to our APIs with PowerShell. We have IGEL docs, the custom partitions and scripts and such. So if we were to go into the IGEL community docs, you can see there's some cheat sheets. So if you're coming up to speed on Linux and want to know how to, different cheat sheet, different commands that you can do. And then we've got other articles in here on how to collect hardware information for a device, different things. There's some Imprivata notes, VPN notes, et cetera in there. The other thing we have in here is the release notes. So inside of here, we have the release notes for the IGEL OS versions, UMS, and ICG. So if I went into OS 11 for the release notes, you can see, hey, our latest release notes is 11.07.103. You can see what's included in there and what new features. So new updated, VMware Horizon, some security kernel fixes we did, et cetera. And then you can see all of the different components and the versions that are in there. And so a ton of stuff that you can see what we were talking about, size of things, if you recall earlier, the different pieces and how big things are. So if you, look in and say, hey, if you're not a Citrix shop, turning off that would save 311 meg of space on your system. So those kind of things are there. In the how-to docs as well, there's some stuff like if you're trying to install IGEL on a new device, how to collect hardware information for the device. You grab all of the logs and stuff, and et cetera. So there's some tips in there. We also show how to turn on hot plug storage. So if you want to plug your thumb drive in, collect the logs and data. So some cool little stuff in here. We talked about the different, switches to get to the terminal console or back to the GUI or whatever. Those kind of things are documented in there as well. In the custom partitions area, it's kind of my little baby here. There's some videos in here that show you how to build a custom partition. So if you want to build a custom partition for Teams, how to add that into UMS, there's little videos for that as well. And the one we'll be talking about today is this little proxy web filtering. So we had a government client that were going to sending people home, and they wanted to turn on the web browser, but they didn't want to configure their proxy and have that traffic going through there. They just wanted a local proxy set up on the IGEL endpoint. So what we did in that was that in the applications, if I go into apps, there was an application here for Priv proxy. So if I look at, let me go ahead and so what I've got in here is the different applications. Oh, I want to go into actually, if I go into network, and that's where I've got the Priv proxy. So you can see there's a custom partition if you wanted to build, for a Pulse VPN or whatever. But Priv proxy, what that's going to do is give you a non-caching web proxy with advanced filtering. And so how these custom partitions work here is that there's basically like a little build script. So you can take this build script, put it on your Ubuntu system and run it. I think building this custom partition, the automation, I think it takes like 15 seconds to build a custom partition for it. So once you've got that custom partition and stuff set up and deploy it down to the endpoint, what you can see here is what I've got here is I've got my little IGEL endpoint. As Patrick was showing in the browser, if I go into settings here and go into sessions for my browser, so Firefox browser, global settings, if you look at the proxy, I've just turned this on to go ahead and say, hey, use the system-wide proxy configuration. And then basically what's set up here on, if I go into network and just show this real quick, in proxy, what I'm doing here for this is, since I've got this set up, I'm just basically, it runs on the local host 127.0.0.1 and on this port. So basically, once that is set up and done, when you open the browser, how we have this one set up right now, if we look over here, I've just got a block, say block everything, only allow igel.com. So if you do that and push that out with these settings, then the only thing, so if you tried to go to Facebook, you would see it was blocked. If you tried to go to igel.com, that would work just fine, those things, but Facebook is blocked. If I try to go to my knowledge base, again, it's blocked as well. So you can, kind of set that up and set it up with a custom partition. That was my quick little show there.
Yeah, that's great, Ron. I mean, I've had that request in the past, customers who maybe they're in government, maybe they're sending devices home with people, but they don't want them using it for personal use. They just want them to access only specific things in the browser. So it's a great feature. They definitely appreciate you taking the time to share that.
Sure. I'll go ahead and stop sharing.
Cool. All right. Well, let's see. Let's throw it out there, guys. If you have any questions, let's throw it out there. We'll give a few minutes here. Anyone enjoying their Grubhub lunch yet? Feel free to share in the chat how it's going. Yeah. Any other questions? Anything you guys want to know? We can walk through. We have a little time left here. Let's open up for Q&A.
Okay, quiet today.
Very quiet. People are, you eat Grubhub lunch, depending on what you get. I mean, in my area, you get a hoagie. That's nap time. All right.
Would be curious as to some of the security challenges that folks on the call have run into, maybe high-level challenges. If there's something there that maybe we haven't addressed or you're curious about, certainly would be happy to dive into it if need be. We've got We're gonna have there 20 minutes or so. We can,
We have 20 minutes booked up. So yeah, by all means, anybody want to throw something out there, throw a question, something you've encountered, we can kind of talk through it. Otherwise, we can give you back 20 minutes. So we'll see. We'll give you another minute here, see if anything comes in, and then if not, we'll just go ahead and just adjourn. And while we're waiting, I definitely want to say I appreciate you guys your feedback on the poll. That gives us some really great data when we talk about the things we're going to be doing next. It looks like customizing is a big one. That's one that we should probably put on our radar, as well as all the different session configurations. So thank you guys. But okay, well look, I don't. Oh, hold on. Did one just come in? VMware versus IGEL. Well, that is an interesting question, because that you wouldn't have VMware versus IGEL. VMware is one of IGEL's partners, so think of VMware, specifically VMware Horizon, as an application to deliver VDI through IGEL. Now, with the question, maybe you can clarify this in the chat, Jorge. You may be talking about VMware Workspace ONE. Which is the ability to manage devices with VMware's management pane. So is that what you're talking about, Jorge? Yes. Okay. So it's actually a great question. Chris, Chris and Ron, I'll kind of let you guys speak to this. It's really, again, not a versus thing. There's actually an integration.
Yeah, it's not a versus thing, right? We actually had partnered with VMware. We have a REST API with our Universal Management Suite, and we worked with VMware using Workspace ONE through some functionality. If they, not everything, but there was some stuff that was built so that you could, using that tool, do certain types of actions, but it would have to go through our UMS, which is designed obviously to securely speak down to and manage our devices. And that's true for other vendors as well. ControlUp, for example, is an IGEL ready partner, and they have a tool that from their console, they can have some capability to do actions going through the UMS and the REST API. So it really depends. But IGEL, our management tool, is purpose built to manage IGEL devices. We could check the alliances team that kind of manages that VMware relationship, get the latest on what we're doing with regard to Workspace ONE.
Yeah, it's basic, as you saw, all the different settings that you can apply to an IGEL device. I mean, there's probably over 7,000 settings that you could do. There's no way you would have another control plane being able to handle and do all of those. So it's really more kind of fit for purpose if you're having like Workspace ONE to say, here's some basic settings and stuff that you want to do, and then using the APIs to push that to the UMS, which would then push it to the endpoints. But for the most part, people really, when they look at that and just see the UMS and the functionality, it just kind of makes sense to really do it there. And then you're not paying any other licensing. There is a cost to using another tool, right, to try to manage that. So a Workspace ONE license is a certain amount, per device per month. You may not need to or want to pay that, right? So, and then from our staffing model and stuff, we've got large enterprises that are staffing to support IGEL endpoints, like over 30,000 devices per one FTE. So if you've got a large retailer with hundreds of thousands of devices, they just have a handful of people to support that whole estate. So
yeah, and I think Ron and Chris, you guys nailed it. I mean, the thing with IGEL, and historically IGEL used to have a Windows management tool that was end of life. Ultimately the cool thing with IGEL is that OS is the management is custom built to manage that OS. So nothing else is going to manage IGEL the same way. The VMware, if you're a VMware Workspace ONE customer, you can integrate it, and maybe that's attractive to you. And if you are looking for that integration, or maybe some other cool integrations with the APIs like ServiceNow, reach out to us, reach out to Zentegra. We'd love to talk to you about that. And we can help you out. And I see Peter has another question. Chris, you wanna go ahead and take that one?
Yeah, because I think if I understand the scenario, somebody off-prem, we have a feature called IGEL Shared Workplace that when you enable that, it would basically require the ability to authenticate as the user, and often tied into an Active Directory login, for example. And then having said that, you can then say use pass-through authentication or Kerberos pass-through into Citrix. But you would know, hey, who logged in on that device. It puts a login screen on top of the IGEL desktop that would then go through the ICG. So there is a scenario there. I guess Storefront, are you using a browser, Peter, or using the native Citrix Workspace app? And you can answer in the chat if that'd probably be easier.
What? Okay. Oh, browser. Okay.
Browser. Okay. Yeah, I think this is the part where you kind of wish you could enable the voice piece so they could speak a little bit better. But let's say we can. So you have a requirement, I guess, to find out who is actually on that device to make sure credentials aren't compromised. I guess this would probably be a good time to ask, are you using any kind of multi-factor auth when going into Citrix, or is it just password auth? Using RSA, the good old tokens, or is it sort of like a push token thing with your phone, mobile browser, or mobile device, or whatever?
Token on mobile.
Yeah. So trying to think here, because actually, I mentioned it earlier. My first customer was actually using RSA tokens to log into Citrix, and we would boot the device up after converting it, and they didn't have a local login set up, and so I'm trying to remember if we ever dealt with who's using that device. They already kind of knew who was coming into Citrix, and they could tell where they're coming from. But if you were to use Shared Workplace, they could authenticate with AD to get to a local IGEL desktop, so you know who logged in, and then from there access your browser and authenticate with your token. So that would be one way to do it. It would be 2 logins for the user, but at least you know who's on that machine. But they're just using password auth to get to the IGEL desktop. By the way, the machine would not be joined to the domain. So you'd set up UMS to connect to AD, set up Share Workplace, enable that feature, and that would also allow you to take some of those profiles and assign them to a user or a group, AD group, if that was a scenario that was of interest.
Yeah, so Peter, I think for sure we should talk offline about that. What you're looking to do, and see if there's a solution that we can get you there. But definitely thanks for that. That's a good question, and there might be a couple ways to do that. We'd have to look into that for you.
I think that's one of the cool things on the IGEL. You get working with the customer, and they're like, hey, we want to do this in the manufacturing line or this out in the field, and you kind of look at it and say, okay, here's the 2 or 3 different ways we can do it, what makes sense, and then get it going. The other thing with IGEL OS being read-only and everything, when you build profiles, you can also kind of embed scripts or other kind of commands or workflows in there to do something for that. So it's usually everything I've been doing for years now, there's always a way to solve it and figure out how to do it. It's just kind of working through the flows and the use case, and that's what's so cool about IGEL is you can do so many different things, So.
right. So we got 10 minutes here. We'll give you guys another minute or two. Any other questions? Anything we can kind of talk through together?
I think the big thing, the IGEL community, if you're not already a member, join that. And tons of stuff, you know, just you got a question on how to do something. I'm sure many people have had the same or similar question, and you can just search in the IGEL community on Slack and find an answer. The other nice thing is with so many members, you post a question, you know, within 6 or 7 minutes, you've got a response on you know how to do it, you know. So it's you're not alone with IGEL. You've got a great community and everything, you know, back behind you. So
I think about, Ron, how many technologies I've used in the past where you don't have that, right? Where you're either trained formally or you're not, right? And it's really hard to find things. You have to go to some third party forum. I mean, IGEL community is without a doubt the #1 tool for every admin you should be using. It looks like we got another question come in. How would you recommend locking down the Workspace app or browser for Citrix logins? We recently switched to Azure SAML sign-in, and the issue we're having is it keeps the user logged in authenticated until you close out of the app browser.
We didn't, okay, so there's a couple different things here. We didn't touch on, Patrick, I remember we dealt with this early on, like a screensaver lock with a password. I'm trying to think of some other things here.
Yeah, so the one that comes to mind, Chris, you know, there's a profile that you can build where you can build an idle command, and essentially you're leveraging the screensaver mechanism to do it. So in your scenario, let's say the device goes idle for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. You can set up the screensaver to execute a command when things go idle, and it could be log out of your session or close your browser, reboot the device, whatever you want it to be. That's one way for sure to make sure that you're that you're going to get you don't have to worry about somebody walking away from a device and their applications are still being presented there. Sometimes in a high use case type environment, a place like this 24/7, healthcare, 24/7 manufacturing, people will use that as the way that they update devices. If the device goes idle for 20 minutes, then you do an update command. Otherwise, that device is not having anything interrupt. But it can alternatively be used for what you're looking to do. Potentially where you have a browser, you're using SAML authentication, but after a certain amount of time of being idle, you don't want that to stay up. You want it to, if the user forgets to close the window or log out, you want that to happen automatically. So that's one thing you do. And John, we can, by all means, let's talk offline about that. Does that answer your question, by the way? Let me just make sure. I'm gonna throw it in the chat there, John.
So I put in the, just out of curiosity, I put in the chat a link to archives.igelcommunity.com. That's an extension of the main IGEL community page, but what's on there what's really cool is I just typed in, there's a search results there, so you can see what's being discussed in Slack, but on a browser. And I just typed in Citrix space timeouts to see what had popped up, and there's a link to a conversation that occurred. I don't know if there was a resolution to it, but at least that it was discussed. And it was basically using the Workspace app to automatically log out after a period of inactivity, something like that. And so maybe another keyword search would have popped something else up, but that's one way to kind of quickly see, and then they give you a link that would open up Slack and take you to the conversation itself.
Yep. So there's a few ways to do that, and John, says gives them some ideas. But yeah, by all means, feel free to reach out. We can talk through that offline, and be happy to schedule some time with you and talk through that.
Let's see here. Maybe Ron, just since we have talked, do you have Slack where it's like if somebody's, you know, I know sometimes like I'll be like there's so much in Slack. How to quickly find something that you're looking for in the actual app itself. Any tips that you found helpful?
No, I mean, just kind of, you know, usually I just kind of just like a Google search, but just do that within Slack, right? Or look from a specific person, you know. So one of our, Seb, right? He's got a lot of responses and stuff. Or Chris Bates. If I want to say, hey, has Chris or Seb, responded to a question about this, and cut it down. So there's different ways you can filter within the Slack and your searches. Yeah.
Yeah. So a couple of things there. So Sebastian Seb, if you don't know who he is, he's the director of the community, and his number one job is managing that. Chris Bates is our manager of the US support, and also his team is in there monitoring and responding to stuff as well. So those two guys alone could probably have enough knowledge to take you to Mars and back. There's a lot of really great talent in the community helping answer questions or pointing in the right direction. So.
All right. Well, guys, looks like we're kind of at the limit here for time. A few minutes. I just want to say, thank you to everybody. This is something that we hope is useful to you. We hope that the information we're sharing is practical. You can take it into your environment and implement it. We want to keep this very conversational. We want to keep this interactive. So next month we'll be doing our next workshop with Logon BSI, which is really great technology. If you haven't checked it out, we talk about load testing. We talk about testing things proactively so that what if your environment can handle a certain change or anything like that. So it's kind of like a synthetic user that you build, and they walk through different steps that you define. So we'll have Brian from Logon BSI on with us next time, and he's going to show us how that works live, and we'll walk through that together. But hopefully, these workshops you're finding them useful. We love doing them. We love interacting with everybody. So by all means, reach out, ping us on the IGEL community. We're on LinkedIn, and hope to see you guys next time. Chris and Ron, thank you guys for coming on. Any parting words of wisdom?
So the example I gave with that local proxy, I just pasted that link in the GitHub site, so you can go right to there, and recorded a little video showing how it works as well. And there's other videos there showing you how to create a custom partition and what you need to do. So, and if you got questions, just go in the IGEL community on Slack, and there's a channel for custom partitions, and ask the question, and I'll respond there pretty quick. So.
Great. Thank you, Ron. Chris, thank you. Guys, again, we really appreciate everything, you guys joining and taking part, and the questions and the feedback. Hope to see you on next month. Have a great week. Have a great holiday coming up, and hope you guys are enjoying the weather change. Have a good one.
All right. Take care, all. Bye-bye.
See you guys.